We've listened to the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, and I wanted to get a sense of the recording process as well as some of the lyrical themes and events that are being referenced, the climate that this was, written in, and just get some of that larger context. The Freewheelin Bob Dylan is the second studio album by the American singer-songwriter Bob Dylan, released on May 27th, 1963, by Columbia. Whereas his self-titled debut album, Bob Dylan, had contained only 2 original songs, this album represented the beginning of Dylan's writing contemporary lyrics to traditional melodies. To traditional melodies. That's kind of something that I was talking about, but I didn't exactly articulate it as succinctly as that. 11 of the 13 songs on the album are Dylan's original compositions. It opens with Blowin' in the Wind, which became an anthem of the 1960s and an international hit for folk trio Peter, Paul, and Mary soon after the release of the album. The album featured several other songs which came to be regarded as among Dylan's best compositions and classics of the 1960s folk scene: Girl from the North Country, Masters of War, Hard Rain's a Gonna Fall, and Don't Think Twice, It's Alright. Dylan's lyrics embraced news stories drawn from headlines about the ongoing civil rights movement, and he articulated anxieties about the fear of nuclear warfare. Balancing this political material were love songs, sometimes bitter and accusatory, and material that features surreal humor. Freewheelin showcased Dylan's songwriting talent for the first time, propelling him to national and international fame. The success of the album and Dylan's subsequent recognition led to his being named as spokesman of a generation, a label Dylan repudiated. I think that means did not like. I'm not 100% sure, though. The Freewheelin Bob Dylan reached number 22 in the US, eventually going platinum, and became a number 1 album in the UK in 1965. So two years later. Interesting. In 2003, the album was ranked number 97 on Rolling Stone's list of 500 greatest albums of all time. In 2002, Freewheelin was one of the first 50 recordings chosen by the Library of Congress to be added to the National Recording Registry for being culturally, historically, or aesthetically significant. All right, let's read about the recording sessions. Neither critics nor the public took much notice of Dylan's self-titled debut album, Bob Dylan, which sold only 5,000 copies in its first year, just enough to break even. All right, at least it broke even, though. That's kind of cool. In a pointed rebuke to John Hammond, who had signed Dylan to Columbia Records, some within the company referred to the singer as Hammond's Folly and suggested dropping his contract. Hammond defended Dylan vigorously and was determined that Dylan's second album should be a success. The recording of Freewheelin took place from April 62 to April 63, and the album was assembled from 8 recording sessions at Columbia Records Studio A. Okay. The political and personal background. Many critics have noticed the extraordinary development of Dylan's songwriting immediately after completing his first album. One of Dylan's biographers, Clinton Halen, connects the sudden increase in lyrics written along topical and political lines to the fact that Dylan had moved into an apartment on West 4th Street with his girlfriend Suze Rotolo in January 1962. Rotolo's family had strong left-wing political commitments. Both of her parents were members of the American Communist Party. Dylan acknowledged her influence when he told an interviewer, "Suze was into this equality freedom thing long before I was. I checked out the songs with her." Dylan's relationship with Rotolo also provided an important emotional dynamic in the composition of the Freewheelin album. After 6 months of living with Dylan, Rotolo agreed to her mother's proposal that she travel to Italy to study art. I see. Dylan missed her and wrote long letters to her conveying his hope that she would return soon to New York. She postponed her return several times, finally coming back in January 1963. Critics have connected the intense love songs expressing longing and loss on Freewheelin to Dylan's fraught relationship with Rotolo. In her autobiography, Rotolo explains that musicians' girlfriends were routinely described as chicks, and she resented being regarded as a possession of Bob, who was the center of attention. The speed and facility with which Dylan wrote topical songs attracted the attention of other musicians in the New York folk scene. In a radio interview on WBAI in June 1962, Pete Seeger described Dylan as, quote, the most prolific songwriter on the scene, and then asked Dylan how many songs he had written recently. Dylan replied, "I might go for 2 weeks without writing these songs. I write a lot of stuff. In fact, I wrote 5 songs last night, but I gave all the papers away in some place called The Bitter End." What does that mean? Is that some kind of a wisecrack? Nope, it's an actual place. Dylan also expressed the impersonal idea that the songs were not his own creation. In an interview with Sing Out magazine, Dylan said, "The songs are there. They exist all by themselves, just waiting for someone to write them down. I just put them down on paper. If I didn't do it, somebody else would." Recording in New York. The album was provisionally entitled Bob Dylan's Blues, and as late as July 1962, this would remain the working title. At this session, Dylan recorded 4 of his own compositions: Sally Gal, The Death of Emmett Till, Ramblin' Gambling Willie, and Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues. He also recorded 2 traditional folk songs, Going to New Orleans and Carina Carina, and Hank Williams' I Heard That Lonesome Whistle. Returning to Studio A the following day, Dylan recorded his new song about fallout shelters, Let Me Die in My Footsteps. Other original compositions followed: Rocks and Gravel, Talking Something, Talking Bear Mountain Picnic Massacre Blues, and 2 more takes of Sally Gal. Dylan recorded cover versions of Wichita, Big Joe Williams' Baby Please Don't Go, and Robert Johnson's Milk Cows Calves Blues. That's not even just Milk Cows Blues. We have a Milk Cows Calves Blues. We're getting the generational blues that are affecting cows and calves. Because Dylan's songwriting talent was developing so rapidly, nothing from the April sessions appeared on Freewheelin. The recording sessions at Studio A resumed on July 9th when Dylan recorded Blowin' in the Wind, a song that he had first performed live at Gertie's Folk City on April 16th. Dylan also recorded Bob Dylan's Blues, Down the Highway, and Honey, Just Allow Me One More Chance, all of which ended up on Freewheelin, plus one other original composition, Baby I'm in the Mood for You, which did not. At this point, music manager Albert Grossman began to take an interest in Dylan's business affairs. Grossman persuaded Dylan to transfer the publishing rights of his songs from Duchess Music, whom he had signed a contract with in January 1962, to Whitmark Music, a division of Warner's music publishing operation. Dylan signed a contract with Whitmark on July 13, 1962. Unknown to Dylan, Grossman had also negotiated a deal with Whitmark. This gave Grossman 50% of Whitmark's share of the publishing income generated by any songwriter Grossman had brought to the company. The secret deal resulted in a bitter legal battle between Dylan and Grossman in the 1980s. These fuck-ass managers, man. Albert Grossman became Dylan's manager on August 20th, 1962. Since Dylan was under 21 when he had signed his contract with CBS, Grossman argued that the contract was invalid and had to be renegotiated. Instead, Hammond responded by inviting Dylan to his office and persuading him to sign a reaffirmment, agreeing to abide by the original contract. This effectively neutralized Grossman's strategy and led to some animosity between Grossman and Hammond. Grossman enjoyed a reputation in the folk scene of being commercially aggressive, generating more income and defending his clients' interests more fiercely than the nicer, more amateurish managers in the village. Dylan critic Andy Gill has suggested that Grossman encouraged Dylan to become more reclusive and aloof, even paranoid. Yeah, probably. I mean, I would not be surprised by that. What the hell, man? On September 22nd, Dylan appeared for the first time at Carnegie Hall, part of an all-time all-star hootenanny. On this occasion, he premiered his new composition, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, a complex and powerful song built upon the question and answer refrain pattern of the traditional British ballad Lord Randall. Hard Rain would gain added resonance 1 month later when President Kennedy appeared on national television on October 22nd and announced the discovery of Soviet missiles on the island of Cuba, initiating the Cuban Missile Crisis. In the sleeve notes of the Freewheelin album, Nat Hentoff quotes Dylan as saying that he wrote Hard Rain in response to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Every line in it is actually the start of a whole new song, but when I wrote it, I thought I wouldn't have enough time alive to write all those songs, so I put all I could into this one. In fact, Dylan had written the song more than a month before the crisis broke. These bastards. Why you gotta lie about it? Dylan resumed work on Freewheelin at Columbia Studio A on October 26th, when a major innovation took place. Dylan made his first studio recordings with a backing band. Accompanied by Dick Wellstood on piano, Howie Collins and Bruce Langhorne on guitar, Leonard Gaskin on bass, and Herb Lavelle on drums, Dylan recorded 3 songs. Several takes of Dylan's Mixed Up Confusion and Arthur Crudup's That's All Right Mama were deemed unusable, but a master take of Carina Carina was selected for the final album. An alternate take of Carina Carina from the same session would also be selected for the B-side of Mixed Up Confusion, Dylan's first electric single, issued later in the year. That's interesting that he was already, I guess, doing some of this electric work and some of this big band experimentation that I guess or people associate with being later, you know, but it was all happening at the same time, it seems like. Or at least the seeds of it were planted here. At the next recording session on November 1st, the band included Art Davis on bass, while jazz guitarist George Barnes replaced Howie Collins. Mixed Up Confusion and That's Alright Mama were re-recorded, and again the results were deemed unsatisfactory. A take of the third song, Rocks and Gravel, was selected for the album, but the track was subsequently dropped. On November 14th, Dylan resumed work with his backup band, this time with Gene Ramey on bass, devoting most of the session to recording Mixed Up Confusion. Although this track did not appear on Freewheelin', it was released as a single on December 14th, 1962, and then swiftly withdrawn. How do you withdraw a single? If it's already out there, what are you going to do? You know? Unlike the other material which Dylan recorded between 1961 and 64, Mixed Up Confusion attempted a rockabilly sound. Cameron Crowe described it as a fascinating look at a folk artist with his mind wandering toward Elvis Presley and Sun Records. Well, you don't say. Also recorded on November 14th was the new composition Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Clinton Halen writes that although the sleeve notes of Freewheelin' describe the song as being accompanied by a backing band, no band is audible on the released version. Langhorne then accompanied Dylan on 3 more original compositions, Ballad of Hollis Brown, Kingsport Town, and What You Gonna Do. But these performances were not included on Freewheelin'. All these names are just sounding like names that are just flying by me at this point. Dylan held another session at Studio A on December 6th. 5 songs, all original compositions, were recorded, 3 of which were eventually included on Freewheelin'. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, Oxford Town, and I Shall Be Free. Dylan also made another attempt at What You Gonna Do and recorded a new song, Hero Blues, but both songs were ultimately rejected and left unreleased. Traveling to England? Oh, okay. 12 days later, Dylan made his first trip abroad. British TV director Philip Seville had heard Dylan perform in Greenwich Village and invited him to take part in a BBC television drama, Madhouse on Castle Street. Dylan arrived in London on December 17th. In the play, Dylan performed Blowin' in the Wind. Oh, okay. I thought he was in the drama. Dylan performed Blowin' in the Wind and 2 other songs. Dylan also immersed himself in the London folk scene, making contact with the Troubadour Folk Club organizer Anthea Joseph and folk singers Martin Carthy and Bob Davenport. I ran into some people in England who really knew those traditional English songs, Dylan recalled in 1984. Martin Carthy, another guy named Bob Davenport. Martin Carthy's incredible. I learned a lot of stuff from Martin. That's cool that he's giving shouts to other people. Carthy taught Dylan 2 English songs that would prove important for the Freewheelin' album. Carthy's arrangement of Scarborough Fair would be used by Dylan as the basis of his own composition, Girl from the North County. A 19th century ballad commemorating the death of Sir John Franklin in 1847, Lady Franklin's Lament, gave Dylan the melody for his composition Bob Dylan's Dreams. Both songs displayed Dylan's fast-growing ability to take traditional melodies and use them as a basis for highly personal songwriting. Yes. From England, Dylan traveled to Italy and joined Albert Grossman, who was touring with his client Odetta. Dylan was also hoping to make contact with his girlfriend, unaware that she had already left Italy and was on her way back to New York. That sucks. Dylan worked on his new material, and when he returned to London, Martin Carthy received a surprise. Quote, when he came back from Italy, he'd written Girl from the North Country. He came down to the Troubadour and said, hey, here's Scarborough Fair, and he started playing this thing. That's funny. Turning to New York. Dylan flew back to New York on January 16th, 1963. So now we're saying that the album's going to be finished recording in 3 months. In January and February, he recorded some of his new compositions in sessions for the folk magazine Broadside. I don't really know what that means exactly. Including a new anti-war song, Masters of War, which he had composed in London. Dylan was happy to be reunited with Suze Rotolo, and he persuaded her to move back into the apartment they had shared on West 4th Street. Dylan's keenness to record his new material for Freewheelin' paralleled a dramatic power struggle in the studio. Albert Grossman's determination to have John Hammond replaced as Dylan's producer at CBS. According to Dylan biographer Howard Sounds, the 2 men could not have been more different. Hammond was a wasp, so relaxed during recording sessions that he sat with feet up, reading The New Yorker. Grossman was a Jewish businessman with a shady past, hustling to become a millionaire. Because of Grossman's hostility to Hammond, Columbia paired Dylan with a young African-American jazz producer, Tom Wilson. Wilson recalled, I didn't even particularly like folk music. I'd been recording Sun Ra and Coltrane. I thought folk music was for the dumb guys. Dylan played like the dumb guys, but then these words came out. I was flabbergasted. At a recording session on April 24th, produced by Wilson, Dylan recorded 5 new compositions, Girl from the North Country, Masters of War, Talkin' World War III Blues, Bob Dylan's Dream, and Walls of Red Wing. Walls of Red Wing was ultimately rejected, but the other 4 were included in a revised album sequence. The final drama of recording Freewheelin' occurred when Dylan was scheduled to appear on The Ed Sullivan Show on May 12, 1963. Dylan had told Sullivan he would perform Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues, but the head of program practices at CBS informed Dylan that his song was potentially libelous to the John Birch Society and asked him to perform another number. Rather than comply, Dylan refused to appear on the show. There is disagreement between Dylan's biographers about the consequences of this censorship row. Anthony Scaduto writes that after the Ed Sullivan Show debacle, CBS lawyers were alarmed to discover that the controversial song was to be included on Dylan's new album only a few weeks away from its release date. They insisted that the song be dropped, and 4 songs, John Birch, Let Me Die in My Footsteps, Rambling Gambling Willie, Rocks and Gravel, on the album were replaced with Dylan's newer compositions recorded in April. Scaduto writes that Dylan felt crushed by being compelled to submit to censorship, but he was in no position to argue. Huh. That's wild. I wonder, would have been a whole different thing. Kind of. Maybe. I don't know. Having not heard those songs, it sure would have been a lot different. According to Halen, there remains a common belief that Dylan was forced by Columbia to pull Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues from the album after he walked out on The Ed Sullivan Show. However, the revised version of the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan was released on May 27, 1963. This would have given Columbia only 2 weeks to recut the album, reprint the sleeves, and press and package enough copies of the new version to fill orders. Halen suggests that CBS had probably forced Dylan to withdraw John Birch from the album some weeks earlier, and that Dylan had responded by recording his new material on April 24th. Whether the songs were substituted before or after the Ed Sullivan Show, critics agreed that the new material gave the album a more personal feel, distance from the traditional folk blues material which had dominated his first album. A few copies of the original pressing of the LP, with the 4 deleted tracks, have turned up over the years, despite Columbia's supposed destruction of all copies. All copies found were in the standard album sleeve with the revised track selection. Interesting. The original pressing is considered the most valuable and rarest record in America, with 1 copy having sold for $35,000. Wow. That seems not that high. How much did that Wu-Tang album sell for? To Martin Shkreli. Wasn't that like a milli something? All right, let's read about what these ding-dang songs are talking about. Blowin' in the Wind. Blowin' in the Wind is among Dylan's most celebrated compositions. In the sleeve notes for the Bootleg Series Volumes 1 to 3, Rare and Unreleased 1961 to 1991, John Baldy writes that it was Pete Seeger who first identified the melody of Blowin' in the Wind as Dylan's adaptation of the old Negro spiritual No More Auction Block. According to Alan Lomax's... Hey, I know that name. That's the guy who recorded all those field recordings. According to Alan Lomax's The Folk Songs of North America, the song originated in Canada and was sung by former slaves who fled there after Britain abolished slavery in 1833. In 1978, Dylan acknowledged the source when he told journalist Mark Rowland, "Blowin' in the Wind has always been a spiritual. I took it off a song called No More Auction Block. That's a spiritual, and Blowin' in the Wind follows the same thing." Dylan's performance of No More Auction Block was recorded at the Gaslight Cafe in October 1962 and appeared on a bootleg thingy. Critic Andy Gill wrote, "Blowin' in the Wind marked a huge jump in Dylan's songwriting. For the first time, Dylan discovered the effectiveness of moving from the particular to the general, whereas the Ballad of Donald White would become completely redundant as soon as the criminal was executed. A song as vague as Blowin' in the Wind could be applied to just about any freedom issue. It remains the song with which Dylan's name is most inextricably linked and safeguarded his reputation as a civil libertarian through any number of changes in style and attitude. Blowin' in the Wind became world famous when Peter, Paul, and Mary issued the song as a single 3 weeks later. 3 weeks later, 3 weeks after the release of Freewheelin'. That's wild. They and Dylan both shared the same manager, Albert Grossman. The single sold a phenomenal 300,000 copies in the first week of release. Oh my God. On July 13th, 1963, it reached number 2 on the Billboard chart with sales exceeding 1 million copies. Dylan later recalled that he was astonished when Peter Yarrow told him he was going to make $5,000 from the publishing rights. I assume Peter is of Peter, Paul, and Mary there. 5,000 from the publishing rights? He was astonished because that's too low? Because that's what I'm thinking. Girl from the North Country. There has been much speculation in print about the identity of the girl in Girl from the North Country. Clinton Halen states that the most frequently mooted candidates are Echo Hellstrom, an early girlfriend of Dylan from his hometown, and Suze Rotolo, for whom Dylan was pining as he finished the song in Italy. Howard Sound suggests the girl Dylan probably had in mind was Bonnie Beecher, a girlfriend of Dylan's when he was at the University of Minnesota. There's no proof of any of this, and musicologist Todd Harvey notes that the lyrics do not, however, contain enough specific information to suggest that Dylan was leaving clues about his personal life. Harvey notes that Dylan not only took the tune of Scarborough Fair, which he had learned from Martin Carthy in London, but also adapted the theme of that song. Scarborough Fair derives from The Elfin Knight, Child Ballad No. 2, which was first transcribed in 1670. In the song, a supernatural character poses a series of questions to an innocent requesting her to perform impossible tasks. Harvey points out that Dylan retains the idea of the listener being sent upon a task, a northern place setting, and an antique lyric quality. Dylan returned to this song on Nashville Skyline, recording it as a duet with Johnny Cash. What the hell? And he returned to it again in the studio with an unreleased organ and sax version in 1978. Well, that's interesting. Later in his book about Dylan, Howard Soanes offers the opinion that Dylan may have been utilizing the largely autobiographical song as a way to gain favor with different girlfriends, whom he dated over the years. Sound states, one wondered which girlfriend Bob was singing about. Bob later gave Echo the impressions that it was her song, but no doubt thinking that women were flattered by having songs written about them, Bob led another North Country girlfriend, Bobby Beecher, to think the same. Later in 1963, when he performed the song on a radio show, Bob indicated that the song was about an idealized woman, saying, "This is dedicated to all the North Country girls." That's sly boots. He knew what he was doing. Masters of War, a scathing song directed against the war industry. Masters of War is based on Gene Ritchie's arrangement of Nottingham Town, an English riddle song. It was written in late 1962 while Dylan was in London. Eyewitnesses, including Martin Carthy and Anthea Joseph, recalled Dylan performing the song in folk clubs at the time. Ritchie would later assert her claim on the song's arrangement. According to one Dylan biography, the suit was settled when Ritchie received $5,000 from Dylan's lawyers. That seems low. That seems low. Down the Highway. Dylan composed Down the Highway in the... So it really is... I guess I see what the kernel of truth in that humility he was expressing earlier, saying, I didn't write these songs, because they're all just adaptations and combinations, as all music is and has been forever. It's just taking a little bit of that, combining it with some of that, and putting your own weird little sprinkle on there, and then you got a stew going. Dylan composed Down the Highway in the form of a 12-bar blues. In the sleeve notes of Freewheelin, Dylan explained to Nat Hentoff, what made the real blues singers so great is that they were able to state all the problems they had, but at the same time, they were standing outside of them and could look at them, and in that way they had them beat. Into this song, Dylan injected one explicit mention of an absence that was troubling him, the sojourn of Susie Rotolo in Perugia. My baby took my heart from me, she packed it all up in a suitcase, Lord, she took it away to Italy, Italy. Bob Dylan's Blues begins with a spoken intro where Dylan describes the origins of folk songs in a satirical vein. Most of the songs that are written uptown in Tin Pan Alley, that's where most of the folk songs come from nowadays. What follows has been characterized as an absurd improvised blues, which Dylan in the sleeve notes described as a really off-the-cuff song. I start with an idea and then I feel what follows. Best way I can describe this one is that it's sort of like walking by a side street. You gaze in and walk on. Harvey points out that Dylan subsequently elaborated this style of self-deprecatory, absurdist humor into more complex songs, such as I Shall Be Free No. 10 in 1964. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall. Dylan was only 21 years old when he wrote one of his most complex songs, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, often referred to as Hard Rain. Dylan is said to have premiered Hard Rain at the Gaslight Cafe, where Village performer Peter Blankfield recalled, he put out these pieces of loose-leaf paper ripped out of a spiral notebook, and he starts singing Hard Rain. Finished singing it, and no one could say anything. The length of it, the episodic sense of it. Every line kept building and bursting. Dylan performed Hard Rain days later at Carnegie Hall on September 22, 1962, as part of a concert organized by Pete Seeger. The song gained added resonance during the Cuban Missile Crisis just 1 month after Dylan's first performance of Hard Rain, when U.S. President John F. Kennedy gave his warning to the Soviet Union over their deployment of nuclear missiles in Cuba. Critics have interpreted the lyric Hard Rain as a reference to nuclear fallout, but Dylan resisted the specificity of this interpretation. In a radio interview with Studs Terkel, Dylan said, "No, it's not atomic rain, it's just a hard rain, it isn't the fallout rain. I mean some sort of end that's just gotta happen. In the last verse when I say, The pellets of poison are flooding the waters. That means all the lies that people get told on their radios and in their newspapers. Many people were astonished by the power and complexity of his work, myself included. For Robert Shelton, who had given Dylan an important boost in his 1961 review in the New York Times, this song was a landmark in topical folk-based songwriting. Here blooms the promised fruit of the 1950s poetry jazz fusion of Ginsberg, Ferlinghetti, and Rexroth. Yeah, those guys are my favorites. I love all those guys. Folk singer Dave Van Ronk later commented, I was acutely aware that it represented the beginning of an artistic revolution. Pete Seeger expressed the opinion that this song would last longer than any other written by Dylan. Side 2, Don't Think Twice, It's All Right. Dylan wrote Don't Think Twice, It's All Right on hearing from Suze Rotolo that she was considering staying in Italy indefinitely, and he used a melody he adapted from Paul Clayton's song Who's Gonna Buy You Ribbons When I'm Gone. In the Freewheelin sleeve notes, Dylan comments, it isn't a love song. It's a statement that maybe you can say to make yourself feel better. It's as if you were talking to yourself. Dylan's contemporaries hailed the song a masterpiece. Bob Spitz quotes Paul Stuckey saying, I thought it was a masterful statement, while Dave Van Ronk called it self-pitying but brilliant. Dylan biographer Howard Sounds commented, the greatness of the song was in the cleverness of the language. The phrase, don't think twice, it's all right, could be snarled, sung with resignation, or delivered with an ambiguous mixture of bitterness and regret. Seldom have the contradictory emotions of a thwarted lover been so well expressed, and the song transcended the autobiographical origins of Dylan's pain. Bob Dylan's dream was based on the melody of the traditional Lady Franklin's Lament, in which the title character dreams of finding her husband, Arctic explorer Sir John Franklin, alive and well. Sir John Franklin had vanished on an expedition searching for the Northwest Passage in 1845. Todd Harvey points out that Dylan transforms the song into a personal journey, yet he retains both the theme and the mood of the original ballad. How would you even hear these songs? How would you, I guess just at a folk festival? Or this is from 1845. Or no, sorry, the song is from a little later than that, I suppose. But the world outside is depicted as stormy and harsh, and Dylan's most fervent wish, like Lady Franklin's, is to be reunited with departed companions and to relive the fond memories they represent. Oxford Town is Dylan's sardonic account of events at the University of Mississippi in September 1962. U.S. Air Force veteran James Meredith was the first black student to enroll at the University of Mississippi. When Meredith first tried to attend classes, some Mississippians pledged to keep the university segregated, including the state governor Ross Barnett. Ultimately, the university had to be integrated with the help of U.S. federal troops. Dylan responded rapidly. His song was published in November 1962 issue of Broadside. What does that mean? A song is published in an issue? So, they just published the lyrics? Or the Talkin' Blues was a style of improvised songwriting that Woody Guthrie had developed to a high plane. A Minneapolis domestic recording that Dylan made in September 1960 includes his performance of Guthrie's Talkin' Columbia and Talkin' Merchant Marine. Talkin' World War III Blues was a spontaneous composition Dylan created in the studio during the final session for the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. He recorded 5 takes of the song, and the 5th was selected for the album. The format of the Talkin' Blues permitted Dylan to address the serious subject of nuclear annihilation with humor, and without resorting to the finger-pointing or apocalyptical prophetic persona. Carina Carina was recorded by the Mississippi Sheiks and by their leader Bo Carter in 1928. The song was covered by artists as diverse as Bob Wills, Big Joe Turner, and Doc Watson. Dylan's version borrows phrases from a few Robert Johnson songs, Stones in My Passway, 3220 Blues, and Hellhound on My Trail. An alternate take of the song was used as a B-side for his Mixed Up Confusion single. Honey Just Allow Me One More Chance is based on Honey Won't You Allow Me One More Chance, a song dating back to the 1890s that was popularized by Henry Thomas in his 1928 recording. However, Thomas's original provided no more than a song title and a notion, writes Halen, which Dylan turned into a personal plea to an absent lover to allow him one more chance to get along with you. It's a vocal tour de force, and showed a Dylan prepared to make light of his own blues by using the form itself. Honey, just allow me one more chance. I Shall Be Free is a rewrite. So every song here is heavily borrowing from something else or adapting it or, interesting. Very interesting. I Shall Be Free is a rewrite of Leadbelly's We Shall Be Free, which was performed by Leadbelly, Sonny Terry, Cisco, Houghton, and Woody Guthrie. According to Todd Harvey, Dylan's version draws its melody from the Guthrie recording but omits its signature chorus, "We'll soon be free when the Lord will call us home." Critics have been divided about the worth of this final song. Critics have been divided about the worth of this final song? What the fuck kind of thing is that to say? Robert Shelton dismissed the song as a decided anticlimax. Although the album has at least half a dozen blockbusters, two of the weakest songs are tucked in at the end like shirt tails. Critics, man. Damn. Todd Harvey has argued that by placing the song at the close of the Freewheelin' LP, Dylan ends on a note of levity, which is a relief after the weighty sentiments expressed in several songs on the album. Yeah, I feel like that's maybe a more, I just feel like that's right. I just feel like that was like the intention. Dylan promoted his upcoming album with radio appearances and concert performances. In May 1963, Dylan performed with Joan Baez at the Monterey Folk Festival, where she joined him on stage for a duet of a new Dylan song with God on Our Side. Baez was at the pinnacle of her fame, having appeared on the cover of Time magazine the previous November. Damn. The performance not only gave Dylan and his songs a new prominence, it also marked the beginning of a romantic relationship between Baez and Dylan, the start of what Dylan biographer Sounds termed one of the most celebrated love affairs of the decade. Aw, that's cute. The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan was released at the end of May. According to Scaduto, it was an immediate success, selling 10,000 copies a month and bringing Dylan an income of about $2,500 a month, equivalent to $25,000 in 2024. A month? So that's what? $250,000, $300,000 in a year for that? That's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's just off that, too. I don't even know about, like, touring and stuff. And whatever other deals you get. You know, you get paid to go on Ed Sullivan, you get paid for a contract, you get paid whatever, I don't know. An article by Nat Hentoff on folk music appeared in the June issue of Playboy magazine and devoted considerable space to Dylan's achievements, calling him the most vital of the younger City Billies. City Billies, that's a new one. Never heard that. In July, Dylan appeared on the second Newport Folk Festival. That weekend, Peter, Paul, and Mary's rendition of Blowin' in the Wind reached number 2 on Billboard's pop charts. Baez was also at Newport, appearing twice on stage with Dylan. The combination of the chart success of Blowin' in the Wind and the glamour of Baez and Dylan singing together generated excitement about Dylan and his new album. Tom Paxton recalled, "That was a big breakout festival for Bob. The buzz kept growing exponentially, and it was like a coronation of Bob and Joan. They were king and queen at the festival." That's so cute. Oh, that's cute. His friend Bob Fass recalled that after Newport, Dylan told him that suddenly I just can't walk around without a disguise. I used to walk around and go wherever I wanted, but now it's gotten very weird. People follow me into the men's room just so they can say that they saw me pee. That would piss me the fuck off. I would start peeing on people. In September, the album entered Billboard's album charts. The highest position Freewheelin' reached was number 22, but it eventually came to sell 1 million copies in the US. I don't know how that works. How do you sell however many copies that much, but then you're only at number 22? Like, what's selling more faster than that? Like, I don't know. Dylan himself came to acknowledge Freewheelin' as the album that marked the start of his success. During his dispute with Albert Grossman, Dylan stated in a deposition, "Although I didn't know it at the time, the second album was destined to become a great success because it was to include Blowin' in the Wind. Besides Blowin' in the Wind, Masters of War, Girl from the Country, A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, and Don't Think Twice, It's All Right have all been acclaimed as masterpieces, and they have been mainstays of Dylan's performing repertory to the present day." The album's balance between serious subject matter and levity, earnest finger-pointing songs, and surreal jokes captured a wide audience, including the Beatles, who were on the cusp of global success. John Lennon recalled, "In Paris in 1964 was the first time I ever heard Dylan at all. Paul got the record to Freewheelin' Bob Dylan from a French DJ. For 3 weeks in Paris, we didn't stop playing it. We all went potty about Dylan." I don't know what that means. We all went batty. The album cover features a photograph of Dylan with Suze Rotolo. Oh, that's Suze Rotolo on the cover. I think you guys have told me that before, actually, but that's cute. It was taken in February 1963, a few weeks after Rotolo had returned from Italy, by CBS staff photographer Don Hunston, as Dylan and Rotolo walked in the middle of Jones Street, approximately 50 feet from West 4th Street in West Village, New York, close to the apartment where they had lived at the time. In 2008, Rotolo described the circumstances surrounding the famous photo. "He wore a very thin jacket because image was all. Our apartment was always cold, so I had a sweater on, plus I borrowed one of his big bulky sweaters. On top of that, I put on a coat. so I felt like an Italian sausage. Every time I look at that picture, I think I look fat. Can't have anything, man. That sucks. Sorry, Suze. You don't look fat. You look cute. Everyone looks cute in that photo. In her memoir, Freewheelin Time, Rotolo analyzed the significance of the cover art. It is one of those cultural markers that influence the look of album covers precisely because of its casual, down-home spontaneity and sensibility. Most album covers were carefully staged and controlled to terrific effect on the Blue Note Jazz album covers, and to not so great effect on the perfectly posed and clean-cut pop and folk albums. Whoever was responsible for choosing that particular photograph for the Freewheelin Bob Dylan really had an eye for a new look. I would agree. And again, she articulated it in a succinct and clear way that brings it to my attention in a way that I would not have consciously otherwise. Critic Janet Maslin summed up the iconic impact of the cover as a photograph that inspired countless young men to hunch their shoulders, look distant, and let the girl do the clinging. That's funny. Legacy. The success of Freewheelin transformed the public perception of Dylan. Before the album's release, he was one among many folk singers. Afterwards, at the age of 22, Dylan was regarded as a major artist, perhaps even a spokesman for disaffected youth. As one critic described the transformation, in barely over a year, a young plagiarist had been reborn as a songwriter of substance, and his first album of fully realized original material got the 1960s off their musical starting block. Janet Maslin wrote of the album, "These were the songs that established him as the voice of his generation, someone who implicitly understood how concerned young Americans felt about nuclear disarmament and the growing civil rights movement. His mixture of moral authority and nonconformity was perhaps the most timely of his attributes." That's a good way to phrase it. This title of spokesman of a generation was viewed by Dylan with disgust in later years. He came to feel it was a label that the media had pinned on him. And in his autobiography, Chronicles, Dylan wrote, "The press never let up. Once in a while, I would have to rise up and offer myself for an interview so they wouldn't beat the door down. Later, an article would hit the streets with the headline, 'Spokesman denies that he's a spokesman.' I felt like a piece of meat that someone had thrown to the dogs." Yeah, that makes sense. Spokesman denies that he's a spokesman. That's funny. The album secured for Dylan an unstoppable cult following of fans who preferred the harshness of his performances to the softer cover versions released by other singers. Richard Williams has suggested that the richness of the imagery in Freewheelin transformed Dylan into a key performer for a burgeoning college audience hungry for a new cultural complexity. For students whose exam courses included Eliot and Yeats, here was something that flattered their expanding intellect while appealing to the teenage rebel in the early 60s souls. James Dean had walked around reading James Joyce. Here were both in a single package, the words and the attitude set to music. Andy Gill adds that in the few months between the release of Freewheelin in May 1963 and Dylan's next album, The Times They Are A-Changin' in 1964, Dylan became the hottest property in American music, stretching the boundaries of what had been previously viewed as a collegiate folk music audience. Critical opinion about Freewheelin has been consistently favorable in the years since its release. Dylan biographer Howard Sounds called it Bob Dylan's first great album. In a survey of Dylan's work published by Q magazine in 2000, the Freewheelin album was described as easily the best of Dylan's acoustic albums and a quantum leap from his debut, which shows the frantic pace at which Dylan's mind was moving. The magazine went on to comment, "You can see why this album got the Beatles listening. The songs at its core must have sounded like communiques, communications from another plane." For Patrick Humphreys, rarely has one album so effectively reflected the times which produced it. Freewheelin spoke directly to the concerns of its audience and addressed them in a mature and reflective manner. It mirrored the state of the nation. Stephen Thomas Erlewin's verdict on the album in the All Music Guide was, "It's hard to overestimate the importance of the Freewheelin Bob Dylan, the record that firmly established Dylan as an unparalleled songwriter. This is rich, imaginative music, capturing the sound and spirit of America as much as that of Louis Armstrong, Hank Williams, or Elvis Presley. Dylan in many ways recorded music that equaled this, but he never topped it." In March 2000, Van Morrison told the Irish rock magazine Hot Press about the impact that Freewheelin made on him. "I think I heard it in a record shop in Smith Street, and I just thought it was incredible that this guy's not singing about Moon and June, and he's getting away with it. That's what I thought at the time. The subject matter wasn't pop songs, and I thought this kind of opens the whole thing up. Dylan put it into the mainstream that this could be done." Freewheelin was one of 50 recordings chosen by the Library of Congress to be added to the National Recording Registry in 2002. The citation reads, "This album is considered by some to be the most important collection of original songs issued in the 1960s. It includes Blowin' in the Wind, the era's popular and powerful protest anthem. The following year, 2003, Rolling Stone magazine ranked it as number 97 on their list of 500 greatest albums of all time, maintaining the rating in a 2012 revised list before dropping to number 255 in a 2020 revised list." Damn. I don't know what happened in those 8 years, man. This album was included in Robert Christgau's basic record library of 1950s and 60s recordings. It was also included in Robert Dimery's 1001 Albums You Must Hear Before You Die. I should get that book. You know, that's one of those, like, that'd be like a good coffee table book to have. And I could add even more albums to my list that nobody will listen to with me, because they're not big popular names. Taylor Swift cited the album as the inspiration for her song Betty on Folklore. As Betty's co-writer, The National's Aaron Dessner explained to Vulture she wanted it to have an early Bob Dylan sort of a freewheelin' feel. That's going to do it for reading the Wikipedia page for the Freewheelin Bob Dylan. I hope you enjoyed. In any case, I'll continue to listen to the album, and I will say that I made a comment when I did the video, and I said I don't see this as being leaps and bounds better than his first album, and I have... That's wrong. That's wrong. The songwriting, the lyricism is just absolutely insane on this thing. So, yeah, there is that. But anyway, thanks for hanging out, everybody. See ya next time.